Hey everybody, so somebody asked me what my favorite horror movie was, and sure enough, I could not think of just one specific movie to settle on, so I picked 15 movies, and out of that, placed what I think is objectively the best of those movies at number one. And so I had, in making this list, I want to talk and give the list, and I know people want to hear my analysis of why I love these movies so much. But in thinking about this, what I realized is a lot of the movies that I've watched that have scared the living hell out of me have not actually been genre horror movies. They're actually maybe thrillers, or they are, dark fantasy, or things like that, but they haven't been actual genre horror movies. So there was a lot of stuff that that I love and that has scared the hell out of me that I could not include on this list. So movies like Watership Down, for example, movies like, When the Wind Blows, which is a phenomenal Cold War paranoia, potential nuclear, awfulizing over the potentials of nuclear war type movie and that sort of thing. Excellent movie, scared the hell out of me, but they really don't fit. And then there's movies like, the David Lynch movies, Eraserhead, Inland Empire, things like that, Rabbits, all of those are all terrifying and disturbing movies, but they're not genre horror. They are dark surrealism. And and you really don't go to a David Lynch movie for the express purpose of being scared. You go to a David Lynch movie for the purpose of taking whatever weird trip he's taking you on, whatever it might be. So things like that I had to think about. I had to also, that said, I had to make a certain concession where there are some movies on this list that might not be considered genre horror in their conception, but they go to such an extreme length in their execution that they essentially become horror movies. So you'll see some things on here that are psychological thrillers, that are crime thrillers, that kind of thing, that essentially qualify as horror movies. And it's kind of like, I guess the best parallel I could draw is like, you have some some of the best science fiction writers out there don't consider themselves genre science fiction writers. Kurt Vonnegut, incredible science fiction writer, did not consider himself a science fiction writer per se. Margaret Atwood, with whatever you think of the rest of her stuff, Oryx and Crake is an objectively phenomenal book. Oryx and Crake, a science fiction novel not presented as genre science fiction. Michael Crichton being another great example, although I'm not much of a fan of his. But anyway, you get the point. So let's get into the actual list. Number 15, Cube. And this is one that I hesitated to put on the list because it's a movie that is very much rooted structurally in science fiction. And the premise of Cube is that you have a group of, I believe, 5 or 6 people that wake up and find themselves inside this giant, these giant cube-shaped rooms that each have exits on all the walls, floor, and ceiling. And they can navigate the rooms. They can navigate from one room to the next at will, but certain rooms have traps in them. So because certain rooms have traps, they can choose to go to whichever room they want, but they run the risk of getting killed. And so this is not giving anything away. This is kind of funny. This is an interesting side story. So one of the things that happens is this group of people that are working together to figure out where in the hell they are and what in the hell's going on and all that, they're eventually able to navigate from room to room without setting off the traps, because they find out that one of the people in their team is an idiot savant that, while he seems to be a simpleton and very slow, he has this capacity for just supercomputer level mathematical calculations, and he's able to figure out the algorithm that determines which rooms have the traps in them, and that's what allows them to move and not, not hit the traps. And the traps are where the horror comes in, because people get ripped, limb from limb and sliced up and torn apart and everything like that. It's kind of a funny anecdote. I was talking on Facebook one time to a friend of mine, and he was talking about this story idea he had, which was very similar to Cube. So I jokingly said, now all you need is an idiot savant that can tell you which rooms have traps in them. And because another person was an internet, like, Facebook friend of mine that I didn't know personally, but she saw that statement and she said, "Oh, so now you're being ableist and transphobic." And she blocked me immediately, and it's like, wait a minute. No, I didn't mean traps in the sense of, in that context, I meant literal traps. But anyway, so Cube is a really cool movie, and I love, the sequels there's two sequels, Hypercube and Cube Zero. Cube Zero obviously is more of a prequel. They're cool ideas. The other two are cool ideas, but they're neither of them are as effective or special as the original Cube. And I always love science fiction and horror movies and everything that can make great use of a small budget. And that's what they did here with this setting. It's a perfectly evenly spaced room. All the walls, floor, and ceiling are all the same size. So what they did is they built one set, and that one set can be every room that the people are moving through. So it's really cool, the economy of budget that they, the budgeting that they did with that. I really love, there's a whole, I don't know if it has a name, but there's a whole subgenre or storytelling trope, if you will, of where it's like 5 people wake up in a strange environment, confined in a strange environment, or arrive for some reason at a strange environment, and they don't know why they're there, and they don't trust each other, and they have to build alliances and work together to figure out what this place that they're in, what this place is and how to get out and that sort of thing. And Jean-Paul Sartre's legendary stage play No Exit is a great example of that. My favorite short story of all time, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, is a great example of that. One example of that not a lot of people talk about, or not a lot of people include in this genre, but it really does fit if you think about it, is the John Hughes movie The Breakfast Club. Even though the place that these 5 unrelated people are confined to is high school during detention, it's still structurally set up the same way as one of those movies. And so I always think about that, and it's really cool that way. So that's Cube. That was Cube at 15. At 14, The Babadook. The Babadook is a fairly recent horror movie that deals with a single mother and her son, her precocious young son, who is alternately shows signs of being extremely intelligent and very gifted, but also shows signs of having some sort of severe mental disturbance and psychosis and that sort of thing. And a mysterious picture book they start reading called The Babadook. And I don't want to say any more than that because I don't want to give it away, but one of the things I love, that it's so good, because really good horror is when you have a conflict or a story that's going on between 2 people or a small group of people, and the supernatural or horrific or otherworldly aspect of what's happening to them is an outgrowth of that conflict that they're having. And in the case of The Babadook, you're constantly going back in narrative focus and that sort of thing between this little boy and his mother. And what's so amazing is both characters are set up to be sympathetic because of the effect that one has on the other, where and then both of them also become antagonistic and become evil in their own right. Where the little boy, we see it from the little boy's perspective, and he's having so much trouble functioning in the world, and he has all of these psychological problems and everything that seem to be stemming from a certain amount of abuse and neglect that he's encountering from his mother. And then we bring it around to the mother, and the mother is at her wit's end dealing with this child all alone. She has no time for herself. She has no ability to she has no time for herself. She has no ability to enjoy life or opportunity to enjoy life, and she's being crazy. She's at her wit's end, being driven crazy, trying to deal with this problem child she has all on her own. And in both cases, they show such an effective balance between the two, where neither one of these characters is truly sympathetic, and neither one of these characters is truly evil. So great interplay between these two leads, and that's what really makes that movie special. Okay, so that was the Babadook. Number 13 is The Witch. And this is the one, the A24 movie that came out that launched the career of, I'm blanking on her name, something Joy. I can't say her name. She's the main character. She went on to, as she played the main character, she went on to star in The Queen's Gambit and all of that. I think she's really great, really great actress. But A24 does some phenomenal movies, and they know, I think they understand when they do a horror movie, they understand what makes something, they understand that building that dramatic tension is crucial to horror, that more so than what we see in the creature that we see or the scary things. Building the dramatic tension and the atmosphere around it is crucial, and this movie has atmosphere in the extreme. You just feel like you are in this other, that by moving out into the woods where these people go, they are contained in a wholly separate realm, and you're just cut off from all reality. And that being the case, it's just a captivating movie. And A24, basically A24 knows that you can make anything scary if you point a camera at some woods at dusk and have the soundtrack go. But this movie is the best iteration of that. I think A24 did another movie recently called Lamb, which I think was the worst iteration of that. But although it was a cool idea and the special effects were really good. But anyway, then also Witch, I think, deals in a very interesting way with an underlying theme of horror movies, which is unrestrained female sexuality. And it's interesting because on the surface, I think men are naturally given to interpret unrestrained female sexuality on a knee-jerk level in a positive sense, because if women are more DTF and women are more giving themselves up for sex and that sort of thing, then there's more possibilities for sex, and that seems on the surface to be good. The reality of that, of course, is that it comes with tremendous underlying consequences. It comes with it raises questions about the psychology of the people involved, and obviously indulging in sexuality brings out, and this is something that'll come up in another one of these movies that I picked, discussing free and open sexuality brings about a great deal of, I think, the erotic subconscious of the people involved, and there's a lot of implications there that don't get considered at first. And this movie is a very understated and very carefully presented exploration of that. And so in such a way, the A24 movies, the best ones and the worst ones, like I saw The Green Knight recently, was phenomenal. All of these, they leave you asking, what did I just see? What did I just witness? In the best possible way. So, The Witch, number 13. Number 12, Elias Merhage's Begotten. This movie is one of the strangest, most inexplicable, most incomprehensible movies you will ever see. And the best way to describe it is it's not just that it has a dreamlike quality, it's that it has an acid trip-like quality, where there are all of these things happening that are very vaguely presented, and it's hard to explain exactly, it's hard to get a finger on exactly what is happening. And literally, I've watched this movie multiple times. I've read summaries of the plot, and I really don't know how to even tell you what's going on, except to say that it uses a lot of the pre-Christian mythological tropes, tropes of dying and rebirthing gods that are, that concept that's eventually codified into what we now think of as the Christian resurrection and that sort of thing. That occurred as a trope in earlier religious practices and earlier religious mythologies and that sort of thing. And it deals with that fundamentally. But even then, it's hard to tell. It's hard to put a finger on, are we dealing with literal gods and demons here? Are we dealing with crazy people in a cult that think they're literal gods and demons? It's really hard to get a finger on. But it has that kind of confidence that you see in like Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain and that sort of thing, where you feel like, okay, we're along for this ride and we're watching what happens. And the movie has such a confidence that it doesn't feel like it needs to tell you anything. You very much feel like you're, kind of peeking through the woods, through the underbrush and the bushes and everything, watching these strange ceremonial events unfold. And the movie is so confident in what it's doing that it does not need to explain any of it to you. So it's a great movie for people who want to, it's a great movie for people who want to sit and contemplate something. And it's certainly horrifying. There's certainly blood and guts and some disturbing elements, but it's so quietly cerebral. There's one of those movies where there's really nothing like it. However, actually, as I say that, there is one thing like it, because the look of this movie, the aesthetics, the design choices, the presentation, all of that was extraordinarily influential on Marilyn Manson, and the packaging and promotion and presentation, the visual elements of Antichrist Superstar. And if you watch all of the music videos that were made for Antichrist Superstar, you can see elements of Begotten in them. But most specifically, the music video for the song Crypt Orchid actually uses a few short clips from Begotten along with new footage cycled into it. The other one that really is very obviously and directly influenced by it is the music video for Tourniquet, and all of that imagery of things in a moldy, worn out house where where it's overrun with leaves and decay and everything, and all of that aesthetic and that look. All of that came from Begotten, as did all of the packaging and everything for the actual Antichrist Superstar album and everything. So it was a huge influence on that. Fascinating work. You will see it and you will have no idea what's going on, but you'll still be glad you watched it. Okay, coming in at number 11, Shinya Tsukamoto's Tetsuo the Iron Man. This is so. There are several Japanese directors on this list, and I think I have a theory that different cultures, especially different cultures, different countries, and everything, have certain genres that they do really, really well, and certain genres of film that they do really, really badly. So, for example, I mentioned the movie Where the Wind Blows earlier, which or movies like Watership Down, that kind of thing. The British do horribly, horribly depressing animation. I don't know what it is, but, it's like Pink Floyd said, hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. So something about British animation is so depressing, but the British do some of the best comedy. Monty Python and everything that proceeded from that and everything. The British do extraordinarily good comedy. So it's things like that, like different cultures pull off different genres better than others. And in the case of the Japanese do horror, in my opinion, do horror better than any other country on the planet. And that, I know the immediate comparison is Korea and the K-horror stuff and all of that. No, I still maintain the Japanese do it best. And so there's a number of Japanese directors and films on here. I could not possibly list all of the Japanese horror or the J-horror movies I like. There's a really great kind of online encyclopedia of Japanese and Asian horror movies and splatter movies and that kind of thing in general. It's called Snowblood Apple. And it's got a great, it's great. If you want to get into J-horror, it is just a compendium of everything from like, you know, all of the different Japanese directors and everything is in there. So highly recommend looking at that. But anyway, Tetsuo the Iron Man is one of the best and most notable films in the Japanese cyberpunk genre. And we think of, in the West, you know, the Western conception of cyberpunk is, you know, typified by William Gibson and Neil Stephenson and Bruce Sterling and all of these guys. And it's the, you know, jacking onto the internet and, you know, carrying out cyber crimes and all kinds of cool stuff like that. The Japanese concept of cyberpunk came later, and it's a very different interpretation of it. It's more, their concept of cyberpunk is more like the David Cronenberg body horror kind of things, you know. And so that it's closer to that. And the live action, you know, Akira, the animated stuff, most people have seen like Akira and Ghost in the Shell and that sort of thing. But the live action ones are lesser known, and so movies like Rubber's Lover and 964 Pinocchio, or Pinocchio 964, depending on how it's marketed. But outstanding among them is Tetsuo the Iron Man, and it's a very interestingly, there have been some sequels that are sort of related. They're very surrealist films, but Tetsuo the Iron Man is the first one. It's shot in black and white. It's beautiful to look at. And it has this, it's this idea of this guy that is literally digging out parts of his body and replacing them with pieces of machinery. And it's not made terribly clear how he's able to stay alive doing this or anything like that. But he eventually transforms himself into the Iron Man, this character of the Iron Man. And it is a very savage and very surreal, I think, commentary on how a lot of Japanese people felt like in the technology explosion, especially with the .com explosion and everything, Japan felt like it was being swallowed up by technology. And this is a very literal commentary on that. I would recommend, Shinya Tsukamoto's movies are incredible in general. He's got two more I would recommend that are not horror movies, but they are very bizarre and surreal. One of them is called Bullet Ballet, and one of them is called A Snake of June. I absolutely loved both of those movies. A Snake of June it's a very cerebral, psychosexual kind of thing. So like in the same vein of like something like Eyes Wide Shut or that kind of thing. And then Bullet Ballet is just simply one of the best film noirs that's ever been done. It's about a man who's obsessed with owning the gun that killed his wife. And it's a movie where you could stop the movie on any frame, and that frame will be just a beautiful image that could be hung in a gallery. It's just the cinema. It has some of the best cinematography that you will ever see in any movie. It is extraordinary to look at. It's shot in black, and that one's shot in black and white too, and it's just beautiful. Anyway, so coming in at number 10, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, a lot of the like 80s slasher movie type horror is not appealing to me just because it's so formulaic. And that's why I really can't get into any of the Jason Voorhees, Friday the 13th type movies. Because especially the earlier films, because they're just glorified, they're just glorified snuff films. I mean, it's just take a bunch of kids and off them in disturbing ways. And there's really not a lot of, there's not a lot of craftsmanship to it. There's not a lot of depth or anything. Freddy, though, is certainly interesting because it is in Freddy's story where we start to see a real development of the character of who this person was and where he came from and the world that he inhabited and occupied and that sort of thing. I do think that Jackie Earle Haley did an amazing job as Freddy in the remake. but you will never top Robert Englund's performance as Freddy Krueger. And the reason I'm recommending Wes Craven's New Nightmare, so there's so many movies in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. The first one is obviously a classic. It's beautiful. It's beautifully done. It's beautifully executed. And it really is, from a technical standpoint, from a suspense building standpoint, it's really good. The thing is, what happened as the movies went on is they started they started going and becoming basically cartoons after a certain point. And you know, I saw a documentary on the Nightmare on Elm Street movies where somebody pointed out that after a point, there was a point where they were selling Freddy Krueger pajamas, which, if you think about Freddy Krueger's origins as a serial killing pedophile, that's kind of disturbing to think about. But anyway, the first one's a classic. The second one is ridiculous. It immediately turns into a cartoon, and Freddy's not scary in that one, because Freddy's not scary if he's just this little gremlin guy that's chasing kids around a pool in full view of everybody. He's scary when he's reaching out of the shadows. So, you know, the first one is good. To me, the rest of those movies are hit or miss in the extreme. Although Dokken did do an incredible song with Dream Warriors. But the movies are hit or miss in the extreme, and when Wes Craven finally did Wes Craven's New Nightmare, you know, came back to the series and did something really cool in the idea of it being a movie where it's not a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, it's a movie about making a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and while they're making it, Freddy starts to cross over into this reality. And that's what I love about the concept of the character of Freddy, is you're not safe, you can't even sleep. You know, that's a very, and Wes Craven is really good about just hitting you in your comfort zone solar plexus, if that makes sense. Like, he just knows how to uproot and unhinge those things that should be comforting. One of the freakiest things in all of his movies, I didn't like the movie Scream. I thought it was like, the Scream was the movie where the football jocks and the cheerleaders suddenly discovered going to see horror movies too. Before then, horror movies had just been for us weird metalheads and bizarre nerdy people and stuff like that. And Scream, it was like, oh, now it's cool to go see horror movies, and you know, and all of that. So Scream that way, I didn't like it, and I didn't like it just wasn't a very interesting idea. But the scene at the beginning where Drew Barrymore is being chased around by the guy, and her parents are coming home right as she comes around the corner, and she tries to call out to them for help, and right as she calls out to them for help, she gets the knife stuck through the back, punctures her lung so that no sound comes out, and she's like screaming and no sound's coming out, and her parents can't hear her. And that feeling of being so close to safety and protection, but being suddenly unable to reach it, to access it, it's so deeply disturbing. It was so deeply disturbing the first time I saw it. It's a great scare, a really deep human scare. The rest of that movie is ridiculous. But anyway, New Nightmare, Wes Craven's New Nightmare is really cool because it's Wes Craven at his most restrained and patient and understated. We never feel in this movie, we never feel like he's in a hurry to deliver the payoff of the scare. You know, where the original Nightmare on Elm Street, as good of a movie as it was, it feels like a young director that's full of a lot of energy, whereas this one is someone who is now an elder statesman of the genre. He has nothing to prove, and so he's going to give you time to be taken through this exercise. And it's really the only movie in the Nightmare on Elm Street genre that I think qualifies really as an art film for that reason. And Robert Englund has said many times that New Nightmare is his favorite of all the movies. So I think that alone makes it noteworthy. Number 9 is Seven, or Sevenin, if you want to go by the way it's written. Seven this is where I was talking about, it's essentially a crime thriller, but because it goes to such an extraordinary length with the blood and guts, with the psychological manipulation of it. It crosses over into the horror genre because of that. So really phenomenal movie. Again, the atmosphere, the world of this movie, just the atmosphere just hangs low in the air. And it's one of those things where it's like this world is bleak and empty and depressing, and oh God, I wish I could walk around in it. You know, that's the thing. A really good horror movie like that should have a setting that is bleak and disturbing and terrifying, but there's a part of you that wants to be there. And Seven does that. I think Seven was where David Fincher came into his own. You know, Alien 3 was a mixed bag. I liked it, but I know a lot of people didn't, and understandably so. Why would be understandably so. But Seven is where he came into his own. And it is, again, the pacing of it and everything, and where the horror, the blood and gore of it is very much secondary. That's a secondary scare to the gradual scare that happens throughout the film, where what happens is the bad guy is ultimately defeated without being defeated. We want to think that we've triumphed, when in reality we've just given the bad guy what he wants. And it's so disturbing, because by the end of that movie, all of the characters in the movie and everybody watching that movie has been brought around to that bad guy's way of thinking, whether they want to, even if it feels like in the moment of watching the movie, you feel like, no, right is right and wrong is wrong, and I don't agree with this crazy person. This crazy person's obviously wrong. But the problem is the whole process of the movie has brought you around to see things from his perspective, whether you want to or not. So what you know to be true about right and wrong and good and evil starts to feel like an article of faith, rather than something that's grounded in objective truth. And now what's grounded in objective truth seems to be this sick, deranged psychopath's worldview. And so again, and just the cinematography, the world of it is a masterwork of pacing, and just every step of the way, it's just a darkly gorgeous movie. So Seven, absolutely. Number 8, Candyman. And this is the movie that I mentioned in passing in one of my other videos that made people, made someone ask what my favorite horror movie was. So Candyman is a really amazing idea, because it proceeds from a real cultural phenomenon that was happening in the 80s and early 90s, which was that the very bourgeois demographic of white society was getting a very disturbing look in the media and that sort of thing at how the other half lived. White people, it seems weird to say now, because nowadays with the ubiquity of the internet and that sort of thing, we don't think about, we know, we are aware of poverty and the effects of poverty and that sort of thing. Or people, I should say, people at all echelons of society are aware of poverty and the effects of poverty and crime and discrimination and police brutality and things like that. We're now all aware of it, you know, and the question becomes, how do you react to it? What do you do about it? That sort of thing. But if you go back to the 80s, it was not understood like it is now. The 80s and early 90s was a very different time. And there was a cultural uprising of things like the LA riots with Rodney King and stuff like that, that actually, and other things to do with police brutality, that really brought this into the, you know, the kind of white bread mainstream, or the awareness of white bread mainstream America in a very real and very intense and very visceral way. And you know, Dave Chappelle has a thing in his comedy routine, the white guy reading the newspaper and saying, "Have you seen this, honey? Apparently the cops have been beating up Negroes like hotcakes." You know, that whole thing, that was, people were genuinely naive about that. And Candyman really it was part of an uprising, of an artistic uprising that was shining a light on these things. Gangster rap was originally gangster rap was something that was really very much a part of this, with the early guys like NWA and Snoop Dogg and all of that, kind of shining a light on what was going on in the impoverished black community and that sort of thing. Of course, what happened was by the end of the 90s, gangster rap had been completely co-opted by bigwig record execs and everything, and they had just turned it into a new minstrel show. But so it ended up not having the effect that it should have, or could have had. And then movies like the Spike Lee films and other movies like John Singleton, Boys in the Hood, and that sort of thing were coming out, were shining a light on this. And so Candyman effectively captures white America's fear of this, fear of the other, without making the blacks in the film themselves be what's scary. And that's what's interesting is, and what I was referring to in that video, is there's this great sequence in Candyman where a well-to-do middle-class white woman is having to go into this tenement housing in the black ghetto. And what we see, it becomes the surrounding world, it becomes increasingly bleak and increasingly empty as she's walking through these halls. And the black poor black people that she's encountering in the film, they are not there. It's not that they're scary, it's not that they're menacing, or although there are some gang members that she encounters and that sort of thing, but it's not that they're scary, it's not that they're menacing per se. It's just they're just watching this woman by herself entering into this incredibly alien world. And that the uncomfortable, alienated, terrified atmosphere just hovers in the air through that whole sequence. And watching that's what I love about it. And by the end of that, by the time she finally gets where she's going to, the effect feels like something like some kind of H.P. Lovecraft in the Mountains of Madness sort of descent into this horrific other world and everything. And it's so beautifully and masterfully done. And so I've not watched any of the other Candyman movies because they're all known to be very low quality, and that's kind of a running thing with a lot of horror franchises, is the first one's phenomenal and the rest are just direct-to-video cash-ins. I've not seen the remake that was made. I would like to. I haven't seen it. But the whole world of it, the character of Candyman symbolically being a black man that was killed, or being a black man that was killed in a hate crime, is very, very, very much, again, playing on some underlying subconscious fears of white America and that sort of thing. And in an effective way. When I say effective, they're not setting up black culture to be something you would be scared of, like you would see in a lot of propaganda movies, like you might see in Birth of a Nation or something like that. Quite the opposite. It's more the psychological reckoning of looking straight in the eye at how the other half lives and that sort of thing. And in that way, it's a lot more like, again, an H.P. Lovecraft thing, an H.P. Lovecraft story where we're terrified in the way that we're encountering the unknown, what is unknown. And it really, as a film, it really captures the extraordinary cultural gap that existed between blacks and whites on the whole during that time period. And that's why I don't care what any of the Robin DiAngelos or Michael Eric Dysons or the other race baiters out there say. We are far more unified and far more connected on a fundamental level across lines of racial difference now than we ever were before. Am I saying things are perfect? No, things will never be perfect. But the difference is really between now and then is really well articulated in Candyman. Also, Philip Glass's score is absolutely phenomenal. I love his score for this. It's like you can tell listening to it that they were very influenced by the way The Exorcist used tubular bells and everything. And the thing is, I love Mike Oldfield. I love tubular bells. The Exorcist is such a ridiculous movie to me. I mean, it's about a demon that basically possesses a young girl so he can control the family. You've gone to all of this, you've gone to all this trouble to possess this little adorable little girl. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to make her say your mother sucks cocks in hell. Oh, well, that's unpleasant. So it's just a very ridiculous movie to me. But I liked what they were trying to do with Tubular Bells. And in Candyman, Philip Glass's soundtrack, which has all of those cyclical arpeggios and everything, that's much like Tubular Bells, really is very effective. It's just a wonderfully haunting, creepy soundtrack. It's Candyman. Number 8, Audition. Oh my God. Okay, Takashi Miike is an extraordinary director. And it's so bizarre because he's a director for hire. So some of he's got this catalog of literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of movies. He puts out like 5 a year. It's insane. But he's got hundreds of movies, and he's got so many movies. Like, some of his movies are very serene and beautiful, like The Bird People of China. He's got a horror comedy musical movie called The Happiness of the Katakuris. He's got one that's very much in that kind of quasi-noir, surrealist David Lynch feeling genre. It's called Gozu. But his the two movies that are generally regarded as his magnum opuses are one, the gangster movie Ichi the Killer, which is a phenomenal movie. And I remember, I think it was Ain't It Cool News said it was the Citizen Kane of arterial spray films, and it really is. But then also Audition. Audition is phenomenal, and it's about a widower, an aging widower who is a movie producer, and he has this idea. He's going to find a new woman to date, a new love interest, by holding a series of auditions of women for a movie for a part that doesn't exist. And this plays on a very real phenomenon, especially in Hollywood and that sort of thing, which is the casting couch phenomenon. And we've seen the reality of that with the dark implications of that with Michael Weinstein and things like that. The men that are essentially inviting women to perform acts of prostitution in exchange for roles, or maybe the role of the movie doesn't even exist. They're just saying that to get women to put out and that sort of thing. It takes that to the next extreme, but rather than him being the villain in the course of the story, the woman in question turns out to be the villain. And it's basically taking the fear of the obsessed lover trope that we see typified by like Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction and that kind of thing, and taking it to the next outer extreme. And again, this is where I talk about like some of these movies would be better described as thrillers, and this is certainly rooted in the psychological thriller genre. But the level of bodily mutilation and visual horror and that sort of thing that occurs really helps it cross over a very, very disturbing on a very deep level, because he really does know how to play on the psychological elements of the psychological elements that go into abuse, and how abuse manifests in the adult life of the abuser as a need to regain control and that sort of thing. And just a fascinating movie. Takashi Miike has some incredible stuff all around, so I highly recommend that. Number 6, Hellraiser, and I'm saying Hellraiser 1 through 4 because those movies are kind of interconnected in a way. A lot of people don't like 4. A lot of people say 1 through 3 are the only good ones and the rest of it's crap. I put 4 in there too because I like how they use Pinhead as a protagonist, and I like how they develop Pinhead in that movie. And Pinhead is certainly one of the more compelling characters in horror cinema, and especially as portrayed by Doug Bradley. I hated that they tried to bring it back and not have Doug Bradley as Pinhead. I'm sorry, there is one other person I'd love to see as Pinhead, and that's J.K. Simmons. I think he could fucking, another scary bald guy, he could fucking nail that part. But other than that, Doug Bradley is Pinhead. And so the first 4 movies, 2, I think, is the best of those 4. But certainly an incredible series. And that's of the, I mean, it's kind of like when you were a kid, if you were an 80s, 90s kid like me, when you were hanging out with your buddies on the playground, you always had that question of like, who would win in a fight, Freddy versus Jason? And we eventually got that movie and everything. But you would always have that argument or that discussion, speculative discussion. And I always think Pinhead was the really the best villain of the popular horror villains at the time. I just really thought Pinhead was a brilliant idea, and and I love the later films kind of lost the plot. They didn't kind of lose; they completely lost the plot, and they didn't have enough budget to do anything really visually spectacular. But the first few movies really explored the horrific implications of the outer extremes of bondage and sadomasochistic culture and everything, sexual sadism and everything in the extreme. And also, I liked that. I like Pinhead because he has a concept. He has a sense of fairness about him and a sense of right. He actually has a sense of right and wrong and a very perverse sense of right and wrong, but it's still there. Where, like, there's a scene in Pinhead 2 where the doctor in the asylum tries to get one of the patients to open the cube, and thinking that Pinhead will attack the patient instead of the doctor. And Pinhead stops the Cenobites, stops his minions from attacking the patient, and says that it's the intention of the summoner, not the hands that do the summoning. And so he goes and attacks the doctor. And so I like that he has a concept of justice and of right and wrong, and he can be reasoned with and that sort of thing. Whereas a lot of these characters are just these, the Michael Myers, prototypical Michael Myers of just, this ominous figure that comes floating towards you and everything. Number 5, Jacob's Ladder, another psychological thriller that goes into the realm of horror. And this movie is so multi-layered, but what I love is it's basically a feature-length panic attack. And I've had, as someone who has struggled with a cycle of anxiety and depression throughout my life, I've had anxiety and panic attacks where I felt like the character that is being portrayed, the Tim Robbins character the character Tim Robbins is portraying on screen. And I love some of the subtler textures of that, where we're exploring genuine sexual arousal and a desire for intimacy during these extreme states of mental breakdown and everything. And I love the statement. This isn't giving too much away, but I love the statement that the chiropractor makes about how the only part of you that burns in hell is the part that's holding on to life, and once you let go of life, the demons become angels that take you to the other side. I love that idea. And I love when that concept is then dramatized without, I hope I'm not giving anything away. When that is used as the basis for the course of action and outcome in the story, it's beautiful. I mean, it is just so bittersweetly beautiful and everything. And I love that. I love the whole the idea that what changes this situation for you is how you change your own perspective on the situation. And it is a fascinating, disturbing movie. And for the video game enthusiasts out there, it is in part what inspired the Silent Hill video game series, especially Silent Hill 2. And it's apparently based upon the structure of the story is based upon the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So a lot of really cool, really interesting stuff in there. And then number 4, Kairo, or under its American title, Pulse. Kiyoshi Kurosawa, the lesser-known Kurosawa director from Japan, has done some really extraordinary stuff. And his stuff, he's got a lot of good ones. Cure is another good one. Bright Future is another good one. But he is someone who knows how to communicate so much subtlety in horror, and is someone who knows that the horror genre can also be bittersweet and sentimental and, comforting, and all of these different emotions that we don't normally associate with the horror genre, but they come out in these very subtle and unusual ways in this in his films. And outstanding among them is Pulse. And Pulse taps into the basic premise is you have a world where people are becoming, it's set in a Japanese society, or a modernized Japanese society, where people are becoming so disconnected from one another that they start disappearing. Like they have the lack of human connection just causes them to vanish. And that's the setup and the premise, and it's a very slow-moving, slow-burning masterpiece. And it plays into something, again, talking about the Japanese culture, where they were feeling like they were being drowned, they were drowning in technology and being absorbed into the technological world and everything. In that way, Pulse was very much ahead of its time, because I think it's even more, now decades later, it's even more relevant when we watch it, thinking about how disconnected we are from each other because of our smartphones and the internet and all of that. I think Kurosawa was light years ahead of his time when he made this movie. And it was just exploring that reality of like the internet and mass communication is actually alienating us from each other. And that's a real problem in Japan, where Japan as a culture has some huge issues with depression and suicide on a mega scale. And so it's a very apropos analysis of Japanese culture as well. Highly recommended. Number 3, Antichrist. Oh my God. Lars von Trier is, his films, he captures, he is so good at, again, being one of these directors that, like I talked about how some of the best science fiction authors don't class themselves that way. He's very much the same when it comes to horror films. He's got some films that are not genre horror that he's known for, and then he like Nymphomaniac is not genre horror. Dancer in the Dark is not genre horror. But then he's got other ones like Antichrist, which unquestionably are horror movies. But again, it's more about, just like with the Babadook, it's more about the conflict between these two people coming to be represented in their surrounding environment and symbolized in their surrounding environment. And it's another movie that I would put in the vein of Begotten, which I mentioned earlier. And so the premise is you have a man and a woman, and they're not given names. They're just him and her, referred to as him and her, and that kind of thing. They're not given names, but they're played by Willem Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsborough, respectively. And it's about two people who are making love and ignoring their baby, who, as a result of their ignorance, plummets to his death. And because of that, they have to go out into this cabin in the woods to try to grieve and process their feelings and talk through it and everything. And their psychological state starts unraveling in that environment. And there are so many ways to analyze this movie. I could do an entire video just talking about that movie. But again, it's one of those things where, it's really remarkably terrifying to get close to get close to somebody and to really open yourself up and expose your vulnerability and someone else's vulnerability, and realizing how much mental anguish and pain we're all holding back from each other. And that's what this movie is getting at. There are people who have said it's a misogynistic movie, and I can understand, especially in the portrayal of female psychosis in the movie. It very definitely places the lion's share of the psychological breakdown on the side of the female character. The male character becomes the sane, by comparison, respondent to what the female character's doing. So I can understand why they would come to that conclusion, but I don't think that's what the film is trying to do. I think that what's really going on there is, I do think it is it's what it's trying to talk about. I think the statement that it's really trying to make is men not being able to communicate with women and not being able to effectively be there for their partners. The kind of it's men are from Mars, women are from Venus, taken in the extreme. And so even though the male character emerges as the protagonist, I don't think that necessarily makes him the good guy or the victim. And I think it really is ultimately a film without a good guy, without a clear-cut good guy or villain. It's just it is a horrific psychological nightmare that two people are trapped in. There's just so many terrifying, like deeply unsettling moments. I don't want to give too much away. There's a moment where an animal speaks midway through the movie. Every time it happens, even if I know it's coming, it just gets under my skin. It just creeps me the hell out. Antichrist, highly recommended. The next two films should not be any real surprise. The second one, Silence of the Lambs. And it's interesting that I was asked to do this list because I just watched Silence of the Lambs last night for the first time in probably about 10 years. And every time I see this movie, it's phenomenal. I've got the book over here and I've never read it. I need to. But Silence of the Lambs, it's like, it's one of those movies like The Godfather, where there is not a hair out of place in this whole movie. Everything is so precisely and perfectly done. And I really do love that it has been embraced as a classic of cinema, as one of the great film classics, and it is the images like Hannibal Lecter behind the glass, being seen behind the glass for the first time, or in his, in the face mask and all of that sort of thing. Those images have entered into cinema the way, like I said, like the way film, seen clips from The Godfather have entered into cinematic history. The way, clips from Ben-Hur have entered into cinematic history and that kind of thing. Like, it is one of those movies where we look at it and we say, this is what movies are supposed to be. This is a realization of what can be accomplished in a movie. And it's so great because, and the Hannibal Lecter character is so great, and then of course Buffalo Bill and all of that. These characters are so great because the real horror is what's going on inside these characters' minds. And again, like I said, this is another one of those movies where it's technically a crime thriller, but it crosses over into the horror genre, and it is just so beautifully realized. In its stark bleakness, but also watching it, it is very much, and I didn't realize this until I saw it again more recently, but it really is a dramatic exploration from, if you look at it, we're tempted to look away from Clarice Starling and towards Hannibal Lecter and Buffalo Bill, but if you look at it truly from Clarice Starling's perspective, it really is a commentary on male-female relations, especially as women emerged in the workforce and that sort of thing, and the changing positions of gender relations and things like that. And there's a lot of that explored in a way that, and I don't think you detect it the first time if you're just seeing it for the first time, but it really does. There is an increased depth of appreciation for it when you think about the ways that Clarice, how Clarice functions in the movie, how not only how the FBI manipulates her into doing things because she's a woman, and they can get people to respond differently because she's a woman, and they're manipulating and using that, and it's that is echoed in Buffalo Bill, and so consequently you really start to realize this very dark and disturbing world that surrounds Clarice purely in her perspective. So many great things. I could go on forever about that movie. It is one of the great all-time classics of cinema, and it always will be. I have mixed feelings about the other movies. Hannibal, I liked Hannibal probably a lot more than other people did. A lot of other people did. Red Dragon was okay. I do really like Edward Norton as an actor. I felt like in Red Dragon you could see that Anthony Hopkins was kind of visibly tired of playing Lecter at that point. And I didn't think Hannibal Rising was any good at all. That was for the movie. That was just ridiculous. But yeah, Silence of the Lambs, one of the great classics of cinema of all time. And then the final one, number one, should come as no surprise, Alien. This movie is so great because, it's funny. I make fun of how, there's always this idea of this cliche in filmmaking and in storytelling where people think you can take a totally mundane, maudlin idea, ridiculous, mundane idea, and just it becomes interesting again if you put it in outer space. And that's basically what Alien is, though. It's a horror movie in space. Structurally, it's a haunted house movie. It's a things go bump in the night movie. It's a Friday the 13th slasher movie in space. I won't keep doing that every time. I'm sorry. But anyway, what's effective about it now, that alone, that basic premise is not that clever, but they use it to realize a lot of things. Now, again, talking about there's a lot of discussion in this of women and sexuality, women's sexuality, and that's because I think that when you strip us down to the primal id of what we are, Jung argued that looking into your own shadow and becoming aware of your shadow self is one of the most horrifying, terrifying things people can do. And when we really break down our archetypal essences as men and women, and we stare into that, there's a lot of really disturbing realities in there that we don't reckon with and we don't deal with. And one of the great things about horror, I think horror as a genre proceeds from the necessity of going on a vision quest, of digging down, going on the hero's journey and digging down into the darkness of yourself and coming out on the other side. And in the case of Alien, that darkness that we're confronting is the reality of something that is very something that's a very common reality for women that men don't think about. And basically the underlying fear that Alien is exploring is the idea of becoming pregnant as a result of being raped. Women confront that reality. They become aware of that reality. They realize that the possibility of becoming pregnant as a result of being raped is something that they have to deal with. They have to factor that into how they live their lives, how they interact with the world, all of that. And so it's disturbing, and it's a disturbing and terrifying idea, but they don't, they confront it and deal with it, and make peace with that as a part of their worldview in a way that men never have to. Men, even in confronting the idea, even in dealing with the idea of possibly being raped, men don't have to worry about becoming pregnant as a result of being raped. And contrary to what all of the, the pro-life people and the Daily Wires of the world and everything would like you to believe, becoming pregnant is not just this wonderful, beautiful, magical experience. It's actually a gross, painful, disgusting, disturbing experience. And a lot of women have very real, deep-seated fears about the idea of this creature growing inside them and things like that. And that can and those fears can actually play out psychological, can have psychosomatic effects. It's kind of like where when Eraserhead was in theaters, there were theaters that would not sell tickets to that movie to pregnant women because they were legitimately worried about incurring miscarriages. Because there's a level of psychological strain at which the body can start to reject the pregnancy and things like that. And that by the way is the origin of that dumbass statement. There was a senator or something that made some dumbass statement about how if a woman is quote unquote legitimately raped, the body has ways of getting rid of it. It's a ridiculous bullshit statement, but that's what he was talking about, wildly misunderstanding an actual psychological reality. But anyway, that is where he was getting his bullshit from. But anyway, the point being, there are all of these fears and disgusting realities about pregnancy, and especially pregnancy as a result of rape, that women reconcile and confront and deal with that men never address in their lives. So what is Alien really about? It's about what would happen, what would it be like, what would a situation be like where men would suddenly find themselves in a position where they can become pregnant by being raped. And that's Alien. That's what the movie is about, and that's why it's so deeply disturbing and so deeply terrifying. And also, in the film, that is why the male characters, when this horrible thing starts happening, the male characters start freaking out and panicking and turning into little drama queens, and the female characters remain calm and focused and cool-headed and level-headed and everything. Because of that archetype, it's like, okay, we know what this is. We can deal with this. Like, we've psychologically confronted the idea of pregnancy as a result of rape, so we're ready to deal with it. And that carries over into the subsequent films too, where, Bill Pullman saying, "That's it, man, game over, and all that stuff. So, that is, why Alien, I could go on with any one of these movies. Why Alien, I think, is my favorite horror movie and the best of all the horror movies. One of the best horror movies. The sequels, now the Alien sequels, it's interesting. The first four, Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, and Resurrection, I love all those movies for different reasons. The first one is a creature horror movie. The second one is a kick-butt action movie, kick-ass action movie. Although I do think it's kind of funny if you watch the 4K restoration, you can tell where you can really see the seams of it all. You can see like scenes where they are running away from explosions, but the explosions are clearly just being projected onto a blue screen and stuff like that. So it gets a little cheap looking when you see the restoration, the HD restoration, but still, Alien's great movie. Alien 3 was actually the first Aliens movie I ever saw. Again, I think it's phenomenal. It tries to be an art house picture. It gets kind of lands just over the line rather than it being a grand slam home run. It's a slow burning knockout that results in victory by decision. And then Alien Resurrection, I liked that in that one they kind of knew that people aren't scared of the alien anymore, so they went for a different road of making it weird and just making it sick and bizarre. And I liked that. I loved that aspect of it. And the dude, I can't think of his name right now, but the voice of Chucky, he's in it. He's really good. And the thing is, I think it's Brad something. I can't think of it. And he's in Mist 3. But anyway, then after that, the Alien movies get real hit or miss. The Alien versus Predator movies should not even be considered canon. So fucking stupid. Because, why? Because the whole reason that the aliens are a problem is because you have, throughout the first four movies, all of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation is trying to get an alien home to Earth so they can breed it as a weapon for the military-industrial complex. And Ripley knows that that cannot be allowed to occur, because if these things get loose on Earth, they're going to cause untold amounts of devastation. Well, the first 4 fucking movies no longer matter if the aliens were already on Earth the whole time. I do like the idea of the aliens being prey for the predators, and I know about the alien skeleton on the ship in Predator 2, which Predator 2 is my favorite Predator movie. But I know about that and everything. I like the idea of the aliens being prey for the predators. I think that's really cool, but I just don't like putting it on Earth in modern times, modern day. That's just ridiculous. Prometheus, I thought, was a phenomenal movie. It's not a horror movie, it's a science fiction movie. Phenomenal movie. I know a lot of people didn't like it. I thought it was incredible. I was fascinated by the ideas of it. I've watched every single fucking explanation, analysis video of that movie. I think it is incredible. A lot of the reason people had a problem with it is because they're like, well, why would people do something so stupid in this situation? Why would they do something so stupid in this situation? Because because it's easy for you to figure it out because you're watching it objectively. If you were in the situation, you're not going to, if you're in the actual situation, you're not going to be thinking rationally. You're not going to have your cooler head about you and everything. It's kind of like the old joke about, why is it in all the slasher movies when she's being chased by the slasher guy, she runs up the stairs into one of the bedrooms. Why does she do that, when she's just trapping herself? Because when she's running in absolute terrified fear like that, she's not thinking strategically. She's thinking at the amygdala level, at the animal level. And at that level, she's just thinking, get to higher ground. We have an impulse that says if we're up in the tree, the predator down there can't get us. So she runs upstairs. That's why. And the horror should come from knowing that you would do something that stupid if you were actually in that situation. And that's why a lot of the weird decisions characters make in Alien in Prometheus are so aggravating for people. But on top of that, the Alien Covenant film, I saw it in the theater and I loved it when I saw it. And then when I left, after I left, the more I thought about it, the more I didn't like it. I love the idea. Part of what makes the aliens, obviously H.R. Geiger's beautiful artwork, and especially down on the planet and everything with the engineer in the first Alien movie, is beautiful and terrifying and evocative. And there's all of this mystery and wonder about it, and wondering where these creatures came from and what they are. And I just didn't like the idea of, the aliens are actually just these creatures that were made by a butthurt android that wanted to wipe out the human race. I mean, what I really liked, what I loved, was the idea that a lot of people suggested, and I think was actually in the original script for Prometheus, that the aliens were the result of an experiment gone bad, or not an experiment gone bad, but a genetic. They were a genetic creation. I'm sorry, I'm getting stuck. I've been talking for almost an hour and 15 minutes. Sorry. Anyway, I like the idea that the human race were an experiment by the engineers, and that Jesus Christ was one of the engineers that was sent down to Earth to teach them how to live right, and they crucified him. And so the aliens were created as the avenging force that would bring, rapture and judgment upon the human race and all of that. That idea I love. That if Ridley Scott had made good on that idea, I think Covenant would have been a hell of a lot better. But instead, looking back on it, I think what Ridley Scott was really thinking was, I'm never going to get to make another Alien movie. They're never going to let me make another Alien movie. So I've got to do something that ties Prometheus into the Alien the Alien timeline. And this is my last chance to do it. And so he just spends all of his time trying to stitch these two franchises together, when really if Prometheus had made tons of money like it should have, it could have been like 3 movies, and we could have a much more gradual exploration of this world and everything. So yeah, and also again, the aliens are not scary when we're seeing them in broad daylight. I mean, they're weird when we see them in broad daylight, but they're the most scary when they're reaching out of the shadows and stuff like that. So the thing at the end where it jumps on the spaceship and everything and all that, not great stuff. And I also didn't like giving into the cliches and the tropes, like, you know, killing the two crewmen that are in the shower having sex and everything like that. It was too easy. But anyway, and Alien Isolation, the video game, I think that is, I do believe that is considered canon to the overall Alien story. And if you have a PS4, PS5, play Alien Isolation, preferably on a big screen TV with the lights off. It's phenomenal. But anyway, for the movies, Alien, the original Alien, I have to come back to that one as, I have to choose that one as my favorite horror movie because simply put, I think it's one of the best movies ever made, and it easily tops this list I made. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Those are my favorite horror movies, all rounded up and put in some semblance of an order. What are yours? Feel free to comment and everything, and I'm going to go have dinner and do a lot of other things that don't involve talking nonstop.